I'm Amy at EuroluxHome.com. Welcome back to our series on the historical overview of styles of European antique furniture. If you have enjoyed this series, please remember to like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can continue to follow the series. So today we're talking about the Renaissance style, and behind me is a late 19th century Renaissance revival piece, but I think it's important for you to have an understanding of the historical development of the style so that you understand the hallmarks or the characteristics that you see in the Renaissance style. So we'll start all the way back in the 14th century in Italy. Now, it's fundamental to understand what's happening in a society in order to understand its art. And so in a previous video, we talked about the Gothic style, which is the art of the Middle Ages. And that's focused on a theocentric universe where God is at the center and the focus is on spirituality, on otherworldliness. But by the 14th century, we begin to see a paradigm shift to an egocentric universe. And by that, I mean a shift away from a great focus on otherworldliness to man and his activities and accomplishments in this world. And the philosophy is known as humanism. So it started back with early humanists such as Petrarch and Boccaccio, developing the Italian language in literature, looking at the classic Greco-Roman texts and beginning to translate them. Now, Renaissance humanists themselves came up with the term of the Dark Ages, of the idea that the Middle Ages had lost all of the learning of Greece and Rome, and that it had suddenly been rediscovered in the 14th and 15th centuries. Now that's their own reinterpretation of what happened in the past, because the truth is that learning continued in the monasteries throughout the Middle Ages. But when we reach the Renaissance, we have this shift to a greater appreciation and interest in Greece and Rome, and all of man's accomplishments, not only in the art and architecture of Greece and Rome, but its literature. And so it creates this frenzy or love for all things Greco-Roman, and that then becomes reflected in the Renaissance style. So in Italy, in the 15th century, you have great works of architecture that are developed, such as Brunelleschi's Duomo or the Palazzo Medici Riccardi, that they're taking elements from Greece and Rome and reinterpreting them to create this new Renaissance style. We also see Renaissance artists, the classic artists that everyone knows, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Botticelli, Raphael. These artists are looking at Greco-Roman art and saying, wow, we want to make art that looks more like man's form in this world, making the anatomy, making the form look more realistic. You have the introduction of linear perspective, making art look more realistic than we saw in the Gothic style. So the Renaissance then starts in Italy, but then it spreads throughout Europe. And we talked in an earlier video in the hunting style about how the Renaissance art spread to France because Charles VIII came down to Italy and sacked Italy, but also saw all of this gorgeous art and architecture and took it back to France and then reinterpreted it as the French Renaissance. We see a waning of the Renaissance style with the rise of Baroque and Rococo, and we'll tell you about those styles in another video. But eventually, by the 19th century, we find a rediscovery of the Renaissance style with this Renaissance revival. So at the end of the 19th century, we have the rise of Romanticism, of nostalgia, of looking back to earlier time periods, and that's when we see this rise again of the Renaissance revival style. But I think it was important for you to understand this development of the Renaissance style so that you have a better understanding of those characteristics of the Renaissance style. So the underlying philosophy behind the Renaissance style is based on humanism and classicism. This focus on man's accomplishments and activities in this world. And the first hallmark of the Renaissance style is that we still have this monumental size. But this time, instead of drawing your eye to focus the theocentric universe, instead it's more of the grandeur of man's accomplishments. So the Renaissance pieces often are very big, meant to reflect the wealth or the prestige of the owner. And we also see a shift in material. In the Gothic style, we had a great focus on oak. Now we see a lot more walnut. And walnut actually is a little softer wood, so it's much easier to carve. And we have just gorgeous carvings in the Renaissance style. So we do see this shift to walnut, which this is a beautiful golden patina behind me. Now, probably the number one way that you will be able to tell that a piece is in the Renaissance style is that you will find the classical elements of classical Greco-Roman architecture on the Renaissance style. So again, this is a late 19th century piece, but we're looking at these architectural elements. So we have the great big column. This would actually be a Corinthian column. We have the idea of an arch that goes across. And we do have an idea of symmetry and proportion in this piece, much more so than in the Gothic style. That is just that idea of what is beautiful is classical proportions, symmetry, balance. And we do find the ornate carvings. We'll look at more ornate carvings, but here we have a musical instrument. We have these acanthus leaves. And then as you go up, you do have the little cherub or putti that is focused on the classical Greco-Roman mythology. And so we'll see this Greco-Roman mythology often portrayed in these pieces. So let's go and we'll look at another piece here. So this is also walnut. It's just a dark walnut rather than the lighter walnut next to it. And I think it jumps right out at you is these classical columns. Here we have Ionic columns. And as you even look up at the top of the piece, you have the idea of it being like a temple, a Greco-Roman temple, that pediment at the top. We have the dental frieze going across the top. And even acanthus leaves here in a second frieze down below. All of these are elements from the classical architecture. Here in the center door and on the side doors, we have all of this ornate scroll work. And this is what is found in Greco-Roman art, in friezes, in mosaics, and on hand-painted wall mosaics. And you find this scroll work, these acanthus leaves, the floral designs. And so this is just a classic expression of the Renaissance style. But we also have here this little jester. So we have this nod to the aristocratic court of man in the court. So we'll come down to the next one. This is actually the hunting style, and we do have another video about the hunting style. But I just want to point out that the hunting style is a subset of the Renaissance style. And you'll see that by that cornice across the top, it looks very similar to that Palazzo Medici in Florence. We also have the little putti, here musicians, they're playing instruments, that reference to mythology in the Greco-Romans, from the Greco-Roman system. So come down this way, and we'll look at a few more pieces. So here's a little smaller scale of a piece. Classic Henry II server. So why do I say Henry II? In our hunting video, we talked about the succession of kings in France. After we had Charles VIII go down to France, or go down to Italy, bring the style back to France, then we had the court of Francis I, who was really the patron bringing the Renaissance style to France, and his son was Henry II. And the style becomes known as the Henry II style. So it's the Renaissance style, but it's often called the Henry II style. So Henry II server, Henry II Renaissance server, classic architectural element of this is actually called a broken arch, but it's not broken, it's just, there's carvings intersecting that arch. We have columns, columns down below, so just a classic piece. Here's yet another, a bigger buffet. So this one, again, has that idea of the broken pediment, which is just part, it's not broken, it's just how you describe having carvings in the center, but this comes from the architectural elements that were found in Greece and Rome. We have columns here. This one actually does have beautiful leaded stained glass. Some do, some don't. But again, a classic example of this style. So coming over here, I wanted to show you another smaller piece. This is just a really pretty little Renaissance cabinet. Could be used as a bedside chest. But just showing you again, this scroll work, the acanthus leaves, the floral design. But then you'll also find human and animal elements. Again, this focus on man in the world. So here we have, maybe this is a little Renaissance courtier, or looks like a female, maybe it's the wife of an aristocrat. But we also have these carved figures from mythology, from Greco-Roman mythology, with all of the scroll work. So we'll look at a few more coming through here. Right here is a really classic piece that shows you this idea of symmetry, balance, proportion, geometry. So you really do have this very rectangular shapes, but yet it's all these fluted columns, and then going up to the top, just this great Greco-Roman arch, the dental frieze that's found all the way across the top. You do have a little animal in there, but here in the center, this classic scroll work, the Greco-Roman influence. Now, I'll also show you that we do have chairs in the Renaissance style. So this would be, if you were to find a chair like this, you would say, oh, look at these classical columns. These are the Ionic columns. They have relief going around, little classical references. Here we have a charming little brass dragon at the top, but even the legs are columns, carved columns. Here's another example of a chair. You often find very rich materials in the Renaissance style. So this has embossed leather. And if you look, the embossing is actually this Renaissance pattern, this scroll work that you find carved on the pieces. So we'll look at another example of the Renaissance style, would be this great big piece. Again, monumental scale, but look at the arches across the top, that classical architectural element. You have columns here, we have twisted columns. So you have the twist up top coming down, but then you do have a little bit of whimsy of adding down here at the bottom of the column. The column is actually sitting on a little jester. So man in his element. Here on the doors, you do again have that scroll work, the acanthus leaves, the floral designs. That's all part of this Renaissance style. The arches. I think as you watch this video, you see more examples, it becomes more clear in your mind what this Renaissance style is. I have one more that I'll show you. Right down here, this one is quite heavily carved, but I wanted to show you right here in the center is again this focus on man in the world. So this is what's called a Figaro Buffet, where we have carved figures here. But the reference is a man pulling a chariot. Well, he has horses, are pulling a chariot, man in a chariot. But you see he actually has muscle tone, and the horses, you can see their muscles as they're moving and rearing, and it is meant to refer to Helios, the sun god, and that classical mythology story, but yet you're seeing the reality of man carving, trying to make it look real, trying to make it look like how man really looks in the real world. And then I'll just throw up at the top, we have a Renaissance jester there at the top. We have all these carved acanthus sleeves. We have columns. Here's a stylized column. And again, all of the scroll work, the classic Renaissance carvings that we find on the Renaissance style. If you have any questions about the Renaissance style, I'd love to answer them for you. Please ask in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really helps a small business. Thanks so much.